We all know that video games can provide incredibly immersive and effective horror experiences, and can invoke terror in us potentially more than any other medium. But have you ever noticed that at some point in a horror video game you just start to get a bit bored? I'm here today to talk about the things that can lead us to losing that terror when we play horror games, and how games can counteract it. I'm not going to talk about horror that is just ineffective or poorly done, as it's pretty obvious when something is just bad and isn't scary. Rather, I'm going to talk about the pervasive force that can suck all of the scariness out of a spooky game, even one that is genuinely terrifying. That is acclimatization. That pesky phenomenon that makes a warm shower seems less special after a while also reduces the terror induced by horror games to boredom and annoyance. As with any genre, there are lots of different types of horror games with many different approaches to eliciting fright in players, with a significant portion of them being pretty effective. This kind of experience might not be to everyone's taste, just as not everybody enjoys horror movies, but for some, video games can provide an unrivaled horror experience, and the safe simulation of various shocking and terrifying situations can be a fun and enriching experience. However, the obvious difference between films and video games is length. On the whole, games are a lot longer than films, and anyone who's as wet as I am when it comes to horror can tell you that being scared is exhausting. So even if you go into it willingly, it can be very difficult to maintain the fun of the experience, even if the horror is genuinely very well done. Even if you play in very short bursts, which can be a very good way to reset your tolerance for terror, the joy in the actual experience the game presents still diminishes over time. This can be true to all games, however, because horror is inherently a distasteful experience by design. Unless you leave enough time to have forgotten it completely, the experience will still sour quite quickly. Now, some games, especially considering that horror is very popular on the indie market, are pretty much the length of a film. These shorter experiences can effectively tell a compelling narrative and make you wet yourself, all in a tight package that really amplifies the impact of both. You get all of the beats of a horror story in an experience that doesn't have ample time to get bored in and can be played in one sitting. Brevity holds massive positives for effective horror. Just look at all the short stories and films out there, and this is especially the case for video games. For example, look at everyone's favourite lost gaming relic, PT, or later titles like Devotion. And if you'd like to hear why horror game demos like PT are so specifically impactful, Aoife Wilson made an excellent video on the topic over on Eurogamer. I can highly recommend it. But it's not just the fact that terror is extremely tiring that makes the length of games poor territory for horror. There's also the sheer fact that they are still video games. Yes, the interactive nature of games mean that the horror is amplified by you being the one in control, as it's that much more personal and close and you can't separate yourself from it. But because this requires you to interact with a game's systems, annoyances with the game, as well as the growing knowledge of a lack of any real threat that comes from dying and respawning, can really take you out of the experience. Whereas in a film, when somebody gets got, they get got for good. In a game, you can't help but see that the stakes are lower, and that lack of a sense of playing for keeps can really take the impact out of the horror. Then, repeated gameplay loops can easily become tedious, especially since this is only catalysed by the high-stress environment, speeding up acclimatization and sapping dread from the player. Because when your blood is up, all patience just goes out the window. However, the whole gameplay bit does, understandably, make for a better gaming experience, so swings and roundabouts. Interestingly, this is why many horror games have gameplay that isn't really overly demanding and tends to be quite simple, to avoid tedium and little irritants that take you out of the horror experience. But they definitely still demand your attention, drawing your focus in and keeping you engaged, which, conveniently, makes you much easier to scare. Even if it's just something little like the puzzles in games like Visage, which are really just looking intently at things or having to go and find a key or something. Having your mind switched on and working helps aid your feeling of accomplishment and flow while getting set up for frights. However, different games have very different approaches to mixing horror into their gameplay formula, or indeed, gameplay into their horror formula. Whereas PT is more of a haunted house spooky ride, Resident Evil is more of an action game, and Outlast is just a manhunt simulator. Outlast's run and hide gameplay can be good for some really big scares, but it's not the most engaging gameplay wise, so it can be pretty boring pretty quickly and you end up just being annoyed. PT's spooky hallway exploration is absolutely wet yourself scary for a bit, which helps it being so short, but when you get into the obtuse puzzle solving sections, that all just goes to pot. Games like PT are revered as horror experiences, but it seems the really enduring ones are ones like Resident Evil, who might sacrifice some horror but have more interesting gameplay. It's not just the actual content of the gameplay that needs to be considered to have an effective and lasting horror video game experience. The strategy behind the application of fright to the player is equally as important in determining how much enjoyment they can get out of the game. Earlier we talked about the relationship between brevity and impactful horror, but there are approaches to overcoming a person's stamina for terror. One way is to introduce variety into the experience, often keeping the horror fresh and keeping the player interested. Alien Isolation is a good example of keeping a core terror theme running for a good while without it losing substance, which is impressive considering that game is just hiding and then going, an alien, for a few hours. Another way is through subtlety and a focus on balancing tension and respite with more concentrated bursts of terror. You can see this in games like Five Nights at Freddy's to an extent, with its jump scares making up only a small fraction of an otherwise uneventful experience, so that the horror is sparse but it hits really hard. A far more contemporary and appropriate reference, however, is the recently massively popular Phasmophobia, with its formulaic popcorn gaming approach to gameplay. Games are relatively short and consistent and repetitive, but the striking relationship between tension, the distraction of various tasks, and the impact of sudden fright, even if it is a bit janky, leads to an experience that gives the visceral reactions that people look for in horror in a neat package that can be repeated as many times as you like. When I say popcorn gaming, this is what I mean. Something that might lack real substance, but gives you the feeling of what you want, so that while it might not be as nourishing as what other experiences offer, it's something that can be reliably consumed without you getting sick of it for a long time. That's exactly the horror experience Phasmophobia offers, and it's why it's so enduring. You can keep coming back for more when you need a fix of good scares in concentrated shots that leave little room for acclimatization to ruin the impact. I hope this has all made sense, as it's kind of a tricky set of feelings and sensations to communicate, and it's even harder to design a game around them. Of course, all horror games require a suspension of disbelief from the player, and no horror experience can ever be perfect, as their impact naturally decays faster than other genres. However, this means that the horror genre is always ripe with new ideas and fresh content from talented and passionate people that want to deliver the most visceral and impactful gaming experiences. I hope this video has helped you to recognise how difficult these experiences are to craft and helps you to appreciate them more in future. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and share it with your friends, as it's a massive help. There are plenty more videos on different aspects of gaming on the channel for you to enjoy, and you can subscribe for more in future. I also post on Twitter whenever I have an update, so you can follow that if you want to stay up to date on all the new uploads. For now though, thanks again for watching and have a lovely day. Bye.